Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 74, with our book today, a book on the list, and you will be surprised when you see this on the video, and you will be surprised when you hear me say it, the title of the book, a book on the list of recommended reading books for the U.S. Marine Corps Officer Candidate Midshipman Rank. Ender's Game by the currently canceled Orson Scott Card. Now, we're going to be reading the Tor Books edition of Ender's Game, published and copywritten in 1991 by Orson Scott Card, and we'll get into a little bit more of the publication of the book and the background of the book. But we are going to be joined by our guest co-host today on the podcast. I'd like to welcome Christen Horne. How you doing, Christen?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So I'm going to, as usual, go ahead here and open up from Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. This is, of course, a chapter book. So we are going to be starting in chapter 3, titled Graff. Once again, from Ender's Game. We're willing to consider extenuating circumstances, the officer said, but I must tell you it doesn't look good. Kicking him in the groin, kicking him repeatedly in the face, in the body when he was down, it sounds like he really enjoyed it. I didn't, Ender whispered. Then why did you do it? He had his gang there, Ender said. So, this excuses anything? No. Tell me why you kept on kicking him. You already had won. Knocking him down won the first fight. I wanted to win all the next ones too, so they'd leave me alone. Ender couldn't help it. He was too afraid, too ashamed of his own acts. Though he tried not to, he cried again. Ender did not like to cry and rarely did. Now, in less than a day, he had done it 3 times, and each time was worse. To cry in front of his mother and father and this military man, that was shameful. You took away the monitor, Ender said. I had to take care of myself, didn't I? Ender, you should have asked a grown-up for help, Father began. But the officer stood up and stepped across the room to Ender. He held out his hand. My name is Graff, Ender. Colonel Hiram Graff. I'm director of primary training at Battle School in the Belt. I've come to invite you to enter the school. After all. But the monitor. The final step in your testing was to see what would happen when the monitor came off. We don't always do it that way, but in your case, and he passed, Mother was incredulous, putting the Stilson boy in the hospital. What would he have done if Andrew had killed him? Given him a medal? It isn't what he did, Mrs. Wiggin. It's why. Colonel Graff handed her a folder full of papers. Here are the requisitions. Your son has been cleared by the IF Selective Service. Of course, we already have your consent, granted in writing at the time conception was confirmed, or he could not have been born. He has been hours from then, if he qualified. Father's voice was trembling as he spoke. It's not very kind of you to let us think you didn't want him and then to take him after all. And this charade about the Stilson boy, Mother said. It wasn't a charade, Mrs. Wiggin. Until we knew what Ender's motivation was, we couldn't be sure he wasn't another. We had to know what the action meant, or at least what Ender believed that it meant. Must you call him that stupid nickname? Mother began to cry. That's the name he calls himself. What are you going to do, Colonel Graff? Father asked. Walk out the door with him now? That depends, said Graff. On what? On whether Ender wants to come. Mother's weeping turned to bitter laughter. Oh, so it's voluntary after all. How sweet. For the two of you, the choice was made when Ender was conceived, but for Ender, the choice has not been made at all. Conscripts make good cannon fodder, but for officers, we need volunteers. Officers? Ender asked. At the sound of his voice, the others fell silent. Yes, said Graff. Battle school is for training future starship captains and commodores of flotillas and admirals of the fleet. Let's not have any deception here, Father said angrily. How many of the boys at the battle school actually end up in command of ships? Unfortunately, Mr. Wiggin, that is classified information, but I can say that none of our boys who makes it through the first year has ever failed to receive a commission as an officer. And none has retired from a position of lower rank than chief executive officer of an interplanetary vessel. Even in the domestic defense forces within our own solar system, there's honor to be had. How many make it through the first year? Asked Ender. All who want to, said Graff. Ender almost said I want to, but he held his tongue. This would keep him out of school, but that was stupid. That was just a problem for a few days. It would keep him away from Peter. That was more important. That might be a matter of life itself. But to leave mother and father, and above all to leave Valentine and become a soldier? Ender didn't like fighting. He didn't like Peter's kind, the strong against the weak, and he didn't like his own kind either, the smart against the stupid. I think, Graff said, that Ender and I should have a private conversation. No, said Father. I won't take him without letting you speak to him again, Graff said, and you really can't stop me. Father glared at Graff a moment longer, then got up and left the room. Mother paused to squeeze Ender's hand. She closed the door behind her when she left. Ender, Graff said, if you come with me, you won't be back here for a long time. There aren't any vacations from battle school, no visitors either. A full course of training lasts until you're 16 years old. You get your first leave, under certain circumstances, when you're 12. Believe me, Ender, people change in 6 years, in 10 years. Your sister Valentine will be a woman when you see her again. If you come with me, you'll be strangers. You'll still love her, Ender, but you won't know her. You see, I'm not pretending it's easy. Mom and Daddy? I know you, Ender. I've been watching the monitor discs for some time. You won't miss your mother and father. Not much, not for long, and they won't miss you long either. Tears came to Ender's eyes. In spite of himself, he turned his face away, but would not reach up to wipe them. They do love you, Ender, but you have to understand what your life has cost them. They were born religious, you know. Your father was baptized with the name John Paul Wajorek, Catholic, the 7 of 9 children. 9 children, that was unthinkable, criminal. Yes, well, people do strange things for religion. You know the sanctions, Ender. They were not as harsh then, but still not easy. Only the first 2 children had a free education. Taxes steadily rose with each new child. Your father turned 16 and invoked the Non-Complying Families Act to separate himself from his family. He changed his name, renounced his religion, and vowed never to have more than the allotted 2 children. He meant it. All the shame and persecution he went through as a child, he vowed no child of his would go through it. Do you understand? He didn't want me. Well, no one wants a third anymore. You can't expect them to be glad. But your father and mother are a special case. They both renounced their religions. Your mother was a Mormon. But in fact, their feelings are still ambiguous. Do you know what ambiguous means? They feel both ways. They're ashamed of having come from non-compliant families. They conceal it. To the degree that your mother refuses to admit to anyone that she was born in Utah, lest they suspect. Your father denies his Polish ancestry, since Poland is still a non-compliant nation and under international sanction because of it. So you see, having a third, even under the government's direct instructions, undoes everything they've been trying to do. I know that, but it's more complicated than that. Your father still named you with legitimate saints' names. In fact, he baptized all 3 of you himself as soon as he got you home after you were born. And your mother objected. They quarreled over it each time, not because she didn't want you baptized, but because she didn't want you baptized Catholic. They still haven't really given up their religion. They look at you and see you as a badge of pride, because they were able to circumvent the law and have a third. But you're also a badge of cowardice, because they dare not go further and practice the non-compliance they still feel is right. And you're a badge of public shame, because at every step you interfere with their efforts at assimilation into normal, complying society. The literary life, Orson Scott Card. Let's talk a little bit about the author of Ender's Game. Born August 24th, 1951, Orson Scott Card is an American writer known best for his science fiction works. He is the first, and as of 2022, only person to win a Hugo Award and a Nebula Award in consecutive years, according to his Wikipedia article, which may be edited for clarity, so read it carefully. He won both awards. He won both awards for his novels Ender's Game in 1985, which we just read that piece from, and its sequel, Speaker for the Dead, in 1986. Card, who is, and we'll talk a little bit about this today, the great-great-grandson of Brigham Young, who isn't in the state of Utah, which makes him a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and was born in Richland, Washington, and grew up both in Utah and in California. Card currently teaches English at Southern Virginia University and has written 2 books on creative writing and serves as a judge for the Writers of the Future contest. He has also been criticized, as I've repeatedly obliquely mentioned, for his writing and public statements being racist in his political leanings, for comparing President Barack Obama's policies to totalitarian dictators of the past, not notably Hitler, who gets a lot of kicking. Yes, I have said that previously on the podcast. We kick Hitler quite a lot because it's very convenient. Let's kick Stalin, which is what Orson Scott Card did. Writing about progressives, this is what Card does, writing about progressives and conservatives in a novel that he wrote about extremists engaging in a civil war in America. Spoiler alert, the progressives lose the Civil War, which, honestly, if we're looking at this realistically, probably tracks to reality. And for his writing since the 1970s, up to and including Ender's Game, he has been accused of being homophobic, or his writing has been accused of having a homophobic subtext, even though I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. And so, now that you have a little background on Orson Scott Card, and he is still alive and he is still writing, and we don't put up statues of people when they're alive. We wait until they're dead. I'm looking at you, Joe Paterno. I wonder when the statues will go up of Orson Scott Card. And so we invited Christen on the podcast today to talk a little bit about Ender's Game, talk a little bit about Orson Scott Card, and talk a little bit about getting canceled in science fiction. And so I'd like to welcome Christen back to the podcast. And I'm going to open up this question for you. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are, why you're here, and why did the U.S. Marine Corps, why do they read this book at the officer candidate midshipman rank? What is it about Ender's Game that makes it worthwhile for a U.S. Marine to read this?
Oh my gosh, that was, I saw that question come in and I was like, I feel like I am the least qualified person to answer that question because I have very little, I know that's true. But I started thinking about it because, I guess a little bit about me. I'm Christen Horne. My career path has been wild and wonky. I, grew up knowing that I wanted to be a performing artist. And so I went into school for opera. And so I did opera for 10 to 12 years, and now I'm a music teacher, and I'm shifted into kind of getting back to my roots. So reading a lot and writing, which I'm not a big fan of the school system and how we're taught. And I hated writing when I was younger. And so I never, ever, 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 ever thought that I would be a writer. But now I'm writing my own novel. And so I'm having a lot of fun with that. And I, have been going back to my books, and I found your podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, this podcast is amazing. I must reach out to him. And so that's why I'm here. But to the question, I have to, I guess, go back to my acting roots and try to put myself in the mindset of like the people who are directing the Marine Corps, and why would Ender's Game be so helpful for officer candidates to read? And I think it's just, Ender is such an incredible example of leadership, specifically in the military. Later in the book, they do talk about him shifting from military leadership to social leadership and being a governor, which I really enjoyed seeing that on this, this second read through. But specifically with the military leadership, I always admired that, is even reading it as a kid. It felt so contrary to how I had witnessed leadership growing up, where I think in the military, especially if you're an officer, Graff has that line where in what is it? Conscripts make good cannon fodder, but for officers, we need volunteers. But the officers are going to be directing the quote unquote cannon fodder. And you want to make the best use of them that you can. You need the military to be as hyper efficient as possible. Efficient. I think that's just the word. And I think in order to do that, turning to Ender, or Orson Scott Card ultimately, turning to Ender as an example is brilliant, I think, in my opinion, because I think a lot of our perception about the military is not that they operate like this, is that they don't listen, they're all power hungry, they've all got egos, everybody at the top has an ego, and they don't care about their underlings and whatever. And I don't know, maybe I don't know enough about the different like military branches, and I know that the military is incredibly brutal, and it needs to be. What was the line, like war? Oh, no, that's later. Trying to wrap up my come to the point, but I just using Ender as a role model helps them stay really creative as military leaders, which I think we also need. Thinking outside the box, especially if you continue reading this book, how Ender gets into the game and starts changing the game, like from the beginning, because the faster you can change the game and keep changing things, the more your enemy is just, they're having to react. They can't plan for that.
Right.
And that is incredibly valuable, I would imagine. On the battlefield.
It is, yes. And a couple of things to hit you with. So I was raised in a military paramilitary background. Okay, so I come out of that sort of background a little bit myself, and I can tell you, and I've had Marines, Navy, Air Force, and Army guys and women, but mostly guys, sorry ladies, jumping around me like Virginia jackrabbits my entire life. And so I've had an insight into that mindset. It is a mindset that is shared among the civilian population with people who are in martial sports. So if you are a person who does boxing or does karate, right, or jiu-jitsu, right, or even plays some of the more brutal collision sports, rugby, lacrosse, those kinds of you share I'm not saying you are military like. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is a line there in the way of conceptualizing reality that goes out directly and is shared, a continuum that is shared by folks who are in those spaces. And so I could speak a little bit to the mindset. And on this podcast, we've read About Face by Colonel David Hackworth, with my buddy, R.J. St. John, who was a master sergeant in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And, in looking at that book, and we've read, of course, the biographies of Ulysses S. Grant and William T. Sherman. This year, we're also going to be looking at the Native American battles, the battles between the Native Americans and the U.S. Cavalry in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, with my semi-regular co-host, Tom Libby. And so we're looking at those books because I do think there are lessons about leadership that can be learned from people in the military. I also think that in our time, we both fetishize the military and we are afraid of it all at once. Yeah. It's all wrapped up into the same thing. So here's a couple of things to just hit you with right off the bat. Less than 1% of the available male population in the United States volunteers to serve for the American military currently. Most people who are between the ages of 18 and 34 do not know anyone, and nor do they have anyone in their friend circle who has served in the military outside of certain geographic areas in the United States. Texas being the biggest one, Florida being the second biggest one, and California being the third. So Texas, California, Florida send the most folks to the military. If you don't live in any of those states and you're listening to me, you probably have never run into anybody who's ever served in your life if you're between 18 and 34.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's insane. In World War II, something like think the total number of people who died in World War II, and I just watched the Robert Oppenheimer movie, so this was sort of brought home to me. 65 million people, I believe, died in World War II. 16 million men served in World War II just from the United States alone. Then your numbers go down, right? So because of the use of the atomic bomb, and we're not going to get into the morality of that on this podcast, but because of the use of the atomic bomb, which has basically scared the hell out of everybody, as well it should, we had 50,000 people die in Vietnam out of 250,000 that served. In Iraq and Afghanistan, get this, we only had, I believe it's like 8,000 people die. That's because of the bomb. There's a direct result of the bomb. So fatalities in warfare have gone down precipitously because of the nature of nuclear weapons. And that's not something we get into in Ender's Game, although there are hints of it around the edges when they start talking about various things, weapon systems and things like that in the game. So those are just a couple of things to sort of frame some thoughts. Also, if you talk to Marines or anybody who's ever done Marine Corps training or trained officers, Marines initially are hired to kill people and break things. That's their job. That's what they're hired to do. And so, again, that's something that we fetishize, but we're also kind of, about it, right? But we need those kinds of people. Like I tell my kids, there's 3 types of people in the world, right? And we see this in Ender's Game too. There's sheep, and there's a lot of sheep. There's wolves, and there's a lot of wolves. But then you have to have sheepdogs, right? And what do the sheepdogs do? They go out and they fight the wolves. Otherwise, the wolves just eat the sheep, and you're done, right? And so you talk about that idea of cannon fodder versus volunteers. I think that's Scott Card is replicating an idea there that was promulgated by the military planners who came out of a post-Vietnam era, which is why the State Department has the Pentagon has a standing objection to Congress ever doing a draft. No more drafts. We do not want anyone to draft. We don't want any draftees. That was one of the biggest lessons we learned in Vietnam. If you have draftees, you have a bunch of guys smoking weed who don't want to be there, and we don't want to deal with that. Instead, we'd like to have people who know they're signing up to kill people and break things, and they know exactly what it means to take a bullet. And so you got a particular mindset in the military that I believe Ender's Game sort of reflects. So that's just some extra thoughts for you there. I don't know how much of that you may be aware of, but just some extra thoughts there that I saw sort of embedded in the way that Scott Card was sort of setting some things up.
Yeah, that's good perspective. I had no idea about the numbers, but like Texas, Florida, and California. And I was like, man, 1% is like I had several friends going to the military. It's like, oh, I'm in California. Okay.
Yeah, 29 Palms. Yeah, that's, I mean, that huge base at 29 Palms. San Diego's a huge port.
I was gonna say, I'm in San Diego. So
yeah, so there you go. You're exactly. There's, if you grew up in San Francisco, you're probably not going to know any.
Right.
But San Diego for sure. Yeah, it'd be shocking if you hadn't. Those guys were out there like Virginia jackrabbits. They're all over the place.
Yes. Yep.
But if you didn't grow up among them, it can be kind of a little bit jarring to kind of run into that mindset.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a follow-up question here. So you said you came out of acting, opera, writing, that kind of space.
Arts. Yep. I'm like the opposite. Like we've got the military, like hardline, brutality, and I'm the art person trying to write about that without ever having experienced it.
Well, the author of Ben-Hur, the Book of the Christ, was Lew Wallace, and Lew Wallace was a general in the Civil War. He fought many battles with General Grant. So don't dismiss the art thing. Right. And I know many military guys who write poetry. The guy, what's his name? T.E. Lawrence. T.E. Lawrence was this adventurer, this raconteur, this British archaeologist. He was an amateur draftsman, and he led the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks, as a subtext to World War One. So don't dismiss the arts. Well, I think it all comes together.
Tolkien served in World War One.
There you go. Right. And so this is a question we're going to kind of explore a little bit of this today, but this is the follow-up question. So what can people in the arts learn from people in warfare?
Discipline is the first thing that comes to mind. I think artsy people were all like, ooh, wait for inspiration. And everybody, if you read any book about from written by a professional artist, they're like, no, that's bullshit. Like, right. So discipline and routine.
Yeah.
I like, it feels so counterintuitive, I think, to I'll use the term artistic spirit because we just want to play with colors. But the structure I have found is just so it's invaluable. Like, that's part of what made me successful as an opera singer, is I was in the practice room for an hour every day. And then I went to go study biology because I was crazy and double majoring. And then I was listening to opera, which is more practicing, basically. And so just the regiment, I think, is probably the number one takeaway that we could learn from we as a I guess a group in general is embrace discipline, embrace routine, and then also, particularly for writers, right, embrace a little brutality. Like writers are always talking about like having to cut things, like, and there's the phrase kill your darlings, and like sometimes if it doesn't serve the end goal, it has to be cut, because otherwise it's just detracting from it, or it costs something. And you want to make your story, yes, it's I consider stories kind of a living, breathing thing that you're discovering. I love the way Stephen King talks about it, but at the same time, you have to stay focused, and really move and do your best to move as efficiently as possible towards your end goal, which is usually the theme of the book. And just like being willing to cut away anything that does not serve that theme that's part of the brutality that I think that comes in, that artists really don't want to do.
So I write books, right? I've written 3 books. I'm mashing around right now. I'll publicly announce this because then it'll lock me in. But I'm mashing around right now with my 4th book, sort of a Joan Didion meets Jim Collins kind of deal, kind of in that frame. And that's sort of where I sit. I sit in the business writing / nonfiction / memoir / reportage kind of space. That's the space that I sit in. Only because, for a whole variety of reasons. That's what interests me. But also, one thing that I found in attempting to write short stories or fiction is, for me, it comes off, to me anyway, in my own head, it comes off as flat, or derivative, right?
Yeah, it's hard to get, especially if you're familiar with tropes,
right?
And any sort, like the whole "there's nothing new under the sun," like this, like how every story has these beats. It's so easy to fall into that, like just everything feels derivative.
100%. Right, exactly. And so I don't think, speaking of Orson Scott Card, and we're going to explore him a little bit here on the podcast today as well, but Card as a writer. So talk with us a little bit about that. You obviously, you're a fan of Ender's Game, and you're a fan of this book.
All of his books. Well, I've read all the Ender books. Ender being like, I love his stuff. It's so
right. So talk a little bit about Orson Scott Card, about the Ender's books, and sort of how Card avoids those tropes, or maybe uses them, whichever way.
So that's, and I think that's the thing is, the awareness is the key. I think if you're aware that, this is a trope, it's like, okay, but this is also part of the story, and it's serving the theme and the overall like message that you're trying to drive home. or just the story that you're accurately trying to represent. I think tropes are tropes for a reason. Like we see them not just in stories, we see them in real life too. Mm-hmm. So what's funny though is like for Orson Scott Card and this world around Ender's Game that he's built, that he follows Ender out into the galaxy or the universe really. And then he's, with Bean Saga, he comes back to Earth and explores all of that. And with Peter, and I never really found it. I just didn't even think about it being derivative at all. It just felt like it was its own thing. I think if I went back, I would start to see the patterns, but I read them when I was so young that I was just like, this is amazing. Even rereading Ender's Game, yeah, you can see the patterns where like, oh, that kid is going to come back. Mm-hmm. Like they're the commanders that mm-hmm. Ender goes head to head with or starts ruffling their feathers. And we're like, well, that has to be resolved. But that to me almost doesn't necessarily feel derivative so much as it feels like a logical conclusion. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of look at it both ways, I think. Like, well, that's literary drama that has to be resolved by X, and then the climax will be this and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, yeah, or this is how tension builds in real life as well, and we just kind of yes, there's some shaping, mm-hmm. Because again, you want it more focused than real life. Real life is, the word that comes to mind is diaspora. It's like just crazy. It's like
it's spread out. It's diffuse. It's spread all over the place. Very diffuse.
Yeah, yes. There's so many things, too many things, right? And so in books you have to focus. So I think that more than anything is why books feel or can feel repetitive, derivative. Like, oh, you know what's going to happen. You can predict things. It's because, well, yeah, you have to focus.
Well, and Shakespeare. I mean, look, we've read Shakespeare on the podcast this year, and so we read Taming of the Shrew, and we read King Lear, mm-hmm. Othello, Hamlet, stayed away from, Midsummer Night's Dream, at least for this year, or Romeo and Juliet. And then the year before, last year, we read Julius Caesar.
Yes.
So there are, you talk about tropes, themes in Shakespeare that have been repeated, even professional writers say this, that have been repeated throughout time, because Shakespeare just wrote the first 6 stories. Yeah. And now we're just repeating. Everybody's just repeating Shakespeare, at least in the Western world. Everybody's repeating Shakespeare. Okay. I'll go a step further. Almost all of your themes that you are going to explore in a particular piece of writing are going to be in the Bible, like they just are.
Oh yeah.
Genesis 1:1, and you're going to go off to the races from there, right? That's why the Bible is the book of books, and we've read passages from the Bible. We read books of the Bible here, exploring different topics, like about the role of the civil magistrate, who are the people that send people out to war. Interestingly enough, we should maybe pick those people well. Maybe that would be a good idea. Civilian control of the military. The idea of the difference between having you talk about Peter. It's interesting. Again, don't want to ruin the surprise, but having a sociopath in charge of your state versus having a regular, just traumatized person be in charge of your state. Those are the kinds of themes that are in the Bible. And of course, then Shakespeare takes those, and you look at something like King Lear, right? Where, you got a bad king who's basically myopic and blind, right? And then we transpose this up to Ender's Game. So I don't think Scott Card would say that he's changing tropes, but I do think that there is a certain capture here, and this is why we're exploring this on the podcast during this month, because this is the month where we're also reading. You mentioned Tolkien. We're reading Tolkien, right? And we're also now we're looking at Scott Card. So talk a little bit about science fiction, fantasy, and sort of how that shifts things around, because you're writing. I believe you're writing a science fiction novel or a fantasy novel.
Fantasy, yep.
Fantasy novel. Okay, yeah. So those are. Fantasy is not Nathaniel Hawthorne. Okay, it's not Jane Austen, right? It's not Herman Melville, or even it's not necessarily Shakespeare. Like Shakespeare wasn't doing Taming of the Shrew out in space.
Right.
So, that's my idea. I have that. You can take that idea. Copyright it. C with a little circle and everything. But talk a little bit about that genre of fantasy, right? And fantasy science fiction genre. Why is it so hard to like make things that work in that genre?
Oh, well, I don't think it is, but I think a lot of it, if there is a difficulty for making things work in fantasy, it's that we're in a different world, or even sci-fi, right? Mm-hmm. We're in a different world. Like, I mean, if you call Star Wars sci-fi, some people insist that it's fantasy. If you space opera or whatever. But even stuff like Star Trek, right? That's effectively like it's sci-fi, but that's not our world. Mm-hmm. Like we do our best to apply science as we know it, and extrapolate, what could happen in the future. But it's effectively not our world. So I think the difficulty can be balancing, I'll say creating a good world that is new and different and fun to play in, but also allows you to explore. And this has always been my favorite thing about fantasy, is that I felt like it allowed me to experience other people's stories, but because it was distilled in a fantasy setting, mm-hmm. I wasn't distracted by real world stuff. Okay. If that makes any sense. My brain never went, oh, I'm not allowed to experience this story because I'm, if we're talking about political correctness, once I, as a person, came onto the scene and started hearing all of these stories about prejudice and particularly racial prejudice, and I was like, I know these stories already because I had read them in fantasy, and so I felt a deep personal connection with those issues. But people look at me and they're like, "You're white, you can't," and I'm like, well, oh, okay, that's news. That's news to me. And that's not to say that reading them in a book is the same as experiencing them as a person. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that I love fantasy because it is an avenue to experiencing other life stories, mm-hmm. and really distilling ideas that maybe setting it at a real world would be off-putting. I just feel like, I've gotten to experience so much and connected with so many ideas and emotions and the things that have happened to people that I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a deeper connection for me. That's how I connect. Now, not everybody does. For some people, fantasy, sci-fi, that's the part that's distracting for them. And they have a much harder time connecting with the story. So they go read, urban fiction or mystery novels or, things that are more grounded in reality. Right. But for me, it was, that helped kind of free my mind up from any sort of inhibitions, kind of like, to bring it back to Orson's Got Card, the game that they not the military game, right, but the computer game that they play, right? Because it's all personality, it's all analyzing their personality and what's going on psychologically with them, because they're in a game, they can do whatever.
Speaking of analyzing people psychologically, let's go back to the book.
Right.
I want to explore this idea of the political correctness and Card getting canceled. I want to talk a little bit about that and subtext.
I had no idea that he was canceled until you said that.
Well, it's in his Wikipedia article. That's all I know. That's all I know.
Oh my gosh.
So apparently old boys are running around saying and writing things.
Yeah, okay.
You got to be careful these days with that. Yeah. And I like what you said there about sci-fi and fantasy being a vehicle that's an avenue to experiencing other life stories.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of things happening in the sci-fi fantasy comic books is in this too. Star Wars, Disney, Marvel line there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dynamics, and we don't have to explore all of them. But I think there's a core idea that you've hit on there, which is this idea of how do we experience other life stories without actually living those lives.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, we have to do this in our imagination. But now we are, to paraphrase from Cillian Murphy, is J. Robert Oppenheimer. We're theorists, right? And our imaginings are horrors to us. The problem is, and we're going to see this again in Ender's Game, at a certain point you have to move from theory to practice. At a certain point you have to move from beating fake people in a fake game to beating real people in a real game. And that is a different dynamic and a different psychology, which again, I think ties into that whole idea of fetishizing, but also rejecting at the same time. And I don't think currently in the West, particularly in what we see roiling in the sci-fi and fantasy genre, and in horror too, a little bit. And I would throw manga into this. I'll throw video games into this. I think we are in the midst of a massive psychological and social struggle in those spaces because our imaginings are horrors, and because you can manipulate code to make it do whatever you want it to do, or you can manipulate a drawing to make it do whatever you want it to do, or you can manipulate words to make them do whatever it is you want them to do.
But you can't manipulate people to do. I mean, that's
well,
debatable, right?
well, that's debatable. That's debatable. That's debatable. That's what we're getting into. Yeah. Well, and we'll talk about Peter and Valentine and propaganda. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. But back to the book. Back to Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. So we're going to pick up a little bit later in Ender's story. He's on a transport to he's on a transport in zero gravity, headed off world. And so we're going to pick up there in chapter 4, launch. I'm going to read a couple of pages in this. The reorientations were too much for some. One boy gagged. Ender understood then why they had been forbidden to eat anything for 20 hours before the launch. Vomiting in null gravity wouldn't be fun. But for Ender, Graff's gravity game was fun. And he carried it further, imagining that Graff was actually hanging upside down from the center aisle, and then picturing him sticking straight out from a side wall. Gravity could go any which way. However I want it to go. I can make Graff stand on his head, and he doesn't even know it. What do you think is so funny, Wiggin? Graff's voice was sharp and angry. What did I do wrong, thought Ender. Did I laugh out loud? I asked you questions, soldier, barked Graff. Oh, yes. This is the beginning of the training routine. Ender had seen some military shows on TV, and they always shouted a lot at the beginning of training before the soldiers and the officers became good friends. Yes, sir, Ender said. Well, answer it then. I thought of you hanging upside down by your feet. I thought it was funny. It sounded stupid now, with Graff looking at him coldly. To you, I suppose it is funny. Is it funny to anybody else here? Murmurs of no. Well, why isn't it? Graff looked at them all in contempt. Scumbrain! That's what we've got on this launch. Pin-headed little morons. Only one of you had the brains to realize that in null gravity, directions are whatever you conceive them to be. Do you understand that, Shafts? The boy nodded. No, you didn't. Of course you didn't. Not only stupid, but a liar, too. There's only one boy on this launch with any brains at all, and that's Ender Wiggins. Take a good look at him, little boys. He's going to be a commander when you're still in diapers up there, because he knows how to think in null gravity, and you just want to throw up. This wasn't the way the show was supposed to go. Graff was supposed to pick on him, not set him up as the best. They were supposed to be against each other at first, so they could become friends later. Most of you are going to ice out. Get used to that, little boys. Most of you are going to end up in combat school because you don't have the brains to handle deep space piloting. Most of you aren't worth the price of bringing you up here to battle school because you don't have what it takes. Some of you might make it. Some of you might be worth something to humanity, but don't bet on it. I'm betting on only one. Suddenly, Graff did a backflip and caught the ladder with his hands and swung his feet away from the ladder, doing a handstand if the floor was down, dangling by his hands if the floor was up. Hand over hand, he swung himself back along the aisle to his seat. Looks like you've got it made here, whispered the boy next to him. Ender shook his head. Huh? Won't even talk to me, the boy said. I didn't ask him to say that stuff, Ender whispered. He felt a sharp pain on the top of his head. Then again, Some giggles from behind him. The boy in the next seat back must have unfastened his straps. Again, a blow on the head. Go away, Ender thought. I didn't do anything to you. Again, a blow to the head. Laughter from the boys. Did Graff see this? Wasn't he going to stop it? Another blow, harder. It really hurt. Where was Graff? Then it became clear. Graff had deliberately caused it. It was worse than the abuse in the shows. When the sergeant picked on you, the others liked you better. But when the officer prefers you, the others hate you. Hey, fart eater, came the whisper from behind him. He was hit on the head again. You like this? Hey, super brain, is this fun? Another blow. This one so hard that Ender cried out softly with the pain. If Graff was setting him up, there'd be no help unless he helped himself. He waited until he thought another blow was about to come. Now, he thought. And yes, the blow was there. It hurt, but Ender was already trying to sense the coming of the next blow. And now, and yes, right on time. I've got you, Ender thought. Just as the next blow was coming, Ender reached up with both hands, snatched the boy by the wrist, and then pulled him down on the arm hard. In gravity, the boy would have been jammed up against Ender's seat back, hurting his chest. In null gravity, however, he flipped over the seat completely, up toward the ceiling. Ender wasn't expecting it. He hadn't realized how null gravity magnified the effects of even a child's movements. The boy sailed through the air, bouncing against the ceiling, then down against another boy in his seat, then out into the aisle, his arms failing until he screamed as his body slammed into the bulkhead at the front of the compartment, his left arm twisted under him. It took only seconds. Graff was already there, snatching the boy out of the air. Deftly, he propelled him down the aisle toward the other man. Left arm broken, I think, he said. In moments, the boy had been given a drug and lay quietly in the air as the officer ballooned a splint around his arm. Ender felt sick. He had only meant to catch the boy's arm. No, he had meant to hurt him. And he had pulled with all his strength. He hadn't meant it to be so public, but the boy was feeling exactly the pain Ender had meant him to feel. Null gravity had betrayed him. That was all. I am Peter. I'm just like him. And Ender hated himself. Graff stayed at the front of the cabin. What are you, slow learners? In your feeble little minds, haven't you picked up one little fact? You were brought here to be soldiers. In your old schools and your old families, maybe you were the big shot, maybe you were tough, maybe you were smart. But we chose the best of the best, and that's the only kind of kid you're going to meet now. And when I tell you Ender Wiggin is the best in this launch, take the hint, my little dorklings. Don't mess with him. Little boys have died in battle school before. Do I make myself clear? There was silence the rest of the launch. The boy sitting next to Ender was scrupulously careful not to touch him. This is an interesting passage for me to read because I have a 6-year-old boy about Ender's age. And my boy is not wired the way that I am. I'm wired a lot more like Ender. And my boy is wired a lot more like Valentine. Not to say that he's soft, but he does have a good heart. He is highly conscientious and he wants to be a hero, but he would rather not engage in violence. I've been a fighter since the beginning. And I've never really had a problem with violence. If it's going to get to it, then we'll get to it. And that's okay. I'm open to exploring all the paths down the road. And I've already done the thought process of what the clearing at the end of the path might be like. And that's the difference between being agreeable and being conscientious, or even between being agreeable, the different levels of being agreeable, psychologically speaking, and being open or being extroverted or being neurotic or whatever, right? And I don't mean neurotic in terms of a mental health diagnosis. I mean sensitivity to negative emotions. I know there's a negative emotion. I just don't care. If we're going to go down the road to violence.
That sounds nice.
Well, and this is something I saw reflected in Ender's game. And this is something, by the way, that I've taken me many, many years to sort of corral and to channel in particular areas that are productive. and that are pro-social rather than antisocial. And in my leadership development training and consulting and working with others, I do take that edge into the room with me. And it really comes down to this idea, and Ender is sort of exploring this with Graff right now, even though Graff has not used these terms with him, and this is why this part of the chapter struck me, that they don't have to like you to work with you. And we live in a culture right now that has switched over from being, because of social media, I think primarily, everybody wants to be publicly agreeable and publicly nice, but passive aggressive on the back end. And I have zero patience for any of that. No, I want to be aggressive up front. Or if we're going to be nice, like actually be nice, but don't snow me in a whole bunch of different ways. So in framing what I just read there, I think that leaders, particularly in our era, in our time, we do miss the power of negative emotions to actually motivate people. Because they're antisocial, not pro-social, right? And we're leaning this direction of being hyper pro-social. But the problem is there's all these dark parts of humanity, and there's all these dark parts of individuals. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I've said this repeatedly on the podcast, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote that after being in the gulags underneath Soviet Russia, that the line between good and evil runs through each and every individual's heart. If you can imagine yourself, and we've read on the podcast, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which the first part of that book is about his experiences in a concentration camp. If you can only imagine yourself being a victim of the tyranny, not the person who's actually perpetrating the tyranny yourself, you are missing something in your own heart. You're missing something critical in your own heart. And that sort of came home. I think this is what Scott Card is beginning to get to when he begins to introduce this idea of leadership and the dark heart of leadership at the bottom. Resentment, jealousy, envy, greed, lust for power. They lie underneath the candy-coated world of historical triumphalism that we all sort of live in the West. And we all want to make sure that everyone's nice. But then when those dark things show up, we have no tools to deal with them. And that's part of the reason why I have this podcast here, because you can read about the dark stuff in books and you can project the avatar of yourself forward. What would you do if you were Ender? And what would you do if you were the kid that got the arm broken by Ender? You have to see both sides of the equation to figure out which side you want to be on. So my question here, leading from a negative, right, Christen? Leading from a negative. Now, you came out of the arts, came out of opera, came out of writing, came out of acting. This is where groups of people have to work together in a pro-social way to produce a product. But there's resentment, there's jealousy, there's I just saw the movie Tar recently on an airplane flight, right? We can talk a little bit about that. But there's all professional jealousy. There's all of this stuff floating around underneath. How do leaders navigate all of that? How do you lead from a negative rather than a positive?
When I saw this question, I was like, what does that mean, leading from a negative? And I started to examine it a little bit. And if you bring it back to Ender, where basically leading at a disadvantage, right, significant or otherwise, or people have been pitted against you and now you're trying to lead them. Even though, Ender had a little bit of time before he was in an official leadership position. But so how do you lead from a negative 1%? I think it's difficult. There's just no way around it. How? So I know for me, my instinct would be to do my best to, you make the decisions, you communicate as best as possible, and then you open it up for listening. I think it's particularly in the arts. I know that there's not always space for this in military leadership, right? Sometimes you just have to make the decision, they have to follow it, and then afterwards maybe you can talk about it when the circumstances, that's the word, are appropriate. right? And sometimes that happens in the arts as well. If you're in a rehearsal and you have to bang through, it's particularly a union rehearsal, you have to bang through your blocking, right? We don't really have time to sit down and nitpick over every little decision that the director has made. You just kind of write down your notes and you do what they say. And then hopefully, I think ideally, there's not always, particularly with union rehearsals. But there's a lot of good things about that the unions have done for us performers. But sometimes it does, I feel, constrain the creative process a little bit. But hopefully there is time to come back and have that dialogue with directors, because it is a very creative process. And as much as they are in charge of shaping the whole production, speaking as a performer, and I haven't directed yet, but working kind of as one of the cogs in that whole wheel, there is also space for like how the performer has, especially if they've done their homework, has conceived of this character. And if that starts to clash with what the director has conceived, then hopefully dialogue, and hopefully both people are listening. There's goodwill there. But again, we're talking all ideals, and that's not talking egos. That's not talking. So like I struggled with this, actually. I came up a couple of times against the whole like ego thing. And I was just so surprised when my mentor would say like, oh, you like, they're not very secure here. That's why you're getting pushback and lashback here. And I was like, what does security have to do about it? Like, we're making the story. I wasn't trying to imply that that was a bad decision, or that they were worth anything less as a director or as a stage partner. Like, I asked a question. And so that was difficult for me to even realize that was in play, because I just don't think about that. I don't think about it that way. But
well, it's identity, right? So yeah. Even in everywhere, I don't care if you are, let me pick an innocuous example that's not in the arts and not in the military. It's
somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between. Albertsons. We've all heard of this store, Albertsons. I'll name a brand we've heard of. If I'm stocking shelves at Albertsons, and I've been doing that for 5 years, I'm not going to admit it, but I have a vested interest in how that shelf is stocked. Why do I have a vested interest in how that shelf is stocked at Albertsons? Not because I'm going to be a manager, not because I want my management to get off of me, although those elements might be somewhere in there, but they're not going to be the ABC things, right? The number one reason I'm going to care about how that shelf is stocked at Albertsons, if I've been working at Albertsons for 5 years, is because the direction of the label on that can says something about my identity. And if you turn the can around, right, these are the things I'm talking about that are in the hearts of people.
Yeah.
Human ego. That's why do I care which way the string beans can faces? Now, partially I care because Albertsons will have a problem with me if I don't face it out correctly the way that their standards and practices say I need to do it. Yeah, okay. But that lasts for about 6 months of me working at Albertsons. And then after that, I have to click into something else, or else I quit Albertsons and I go become an opera singer. Or I quit Albertsons and I go join the military. I go find the thing that matches my ego more. And we don't ever talk about this. We never do. So, in my consultancy, I will work with businesses and public sector organizations, private sector organizations across the industry spectrum, from manufacturing and retail to computers, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, all over the map, right? Even public utilities, energy, all that kind of stuff. And then in government, civil service bureaucrats across the board. I have yet to run into, in the 12 years of doing what I've been doing, I have yet to run into somebody who doesn't have an ego.
Well, it's just inherent in like human
Yeah, but you would think, right? I'm serving the world. I work at let me pick an agency. I work at the EPA. I'm serving the world by making the environment friendly for the spotted tail owl. Why do I have an ego about the spotted tail owl? Well, I have an ego about the spotted tail owl because my identity is tied up into as much of my identity is tied up into working at the EPA as it would be if I were stocking shelves at Albertsons. But we don't say that.
Yeah.
And so you see this in performers and directors, right? There it's a little sharper because everybody's ego is on display, right? So let me frame this question then. If everybody's ego is on display, right, and everybody's doing the show, and this is, I did a little bit of work in the theater. My daughter did a little bit of work in the theater. And by the way, just to fully, sort of disclose, I have a background in the arts as well. I have a bachelor in fine arts, did all that stuff. Okay. I'm not a theater person by nature. I can maybe work in the back end, but I can't put up with people's egos about the story. I just can't, because you didn't write it. You're just saying the words. Now that makes me probably a bad theater person and a bad theater director. That would make me a terrible theater director. I'd probably be a vicious dictator. It'd be horrible. That's why I didn't go into that, right? I went into other things. And I'm admitting this about myself, right? But talk a little bit about that ego struggle, because that's probably the most important thing you said there, that ego struggle between the performer and the director. I'm sure you've seen examples of this.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh. I won't name the company, but I had a
No, we're not naming
friend,
names.
but
we named Albertsons. That was good enough.
Yeah. But I had a friend who was doing, he was an up and coming bass baritone, great singer, good acting chops, which is rare in opera. The conductors is where you see a lot of ego, unfortunately, I think, in opera, particularly if they're feeling stressed, then they want to pick on the little guy. And so this was a young artist, and so the conductor stopped the rehearsal and yelled at him in front of the entire cast and was like, "You're late, or you're behind, or you're too slow." And my friend had finally gotten so fed up with this conductor, he said, "No, you changed the tempo." And finally, and so usually singers are expected to just kind of lie down and take it. We're seen as like the easiest replaceable cog. And so everybody was like, they couldn't believe that he had defended himself. And so it's unfortunately, I think it's very pervasive. And for me, it's kind of like what you said. We're just repeating these words. Our egos have no place in this story. We serve the story. That's what it's about. It's not about us. It's about the story. That, like, there's a reason that this play or this opera has been done over and over and over again. There's a reason it's on the docket now. And it's because that people connect with this story. It's not about us. And so I like I said, I actually struggle with this concept, because that has always been so firmly in my head. And I wonder if part of it comes from being a reader growing up, is that everything kind of has been about the story my whole life. And so, but yeah, when you start to tie in, like, your personal worth is something that artists struggle with a lot, with your interpretation of this story, then yeah, there start to become a whole mess of problems when people challenge that particular interpretation, particularly if their interpretation of their character doesn't mesh with your interpretation of the story. And then all of a sudden you're fighting, and the power struggle happens there, right? And then the director is, kind of on top, effectively, director, conductor, whoever. And then the performer is mad the whole time and probably shit talking you and backstage. And, if you do it to enough of the performers, then you have a little coup going on, and or you can. And depending on who has the ear of that particular house or theater, one or the other will not be working there again. Yeah.
So such as in the theater, such as, I'm a huge fan of film, such as in film.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like it's, the power struggle is not worse. It's actually, because in film, I think the power tends to be with the directors far more than the actors, even big name actors. Was very recently, what was his name? There was an actor that apparently like had gotten blacklisted from Hollywood. He was doing a ton of movies and then all of a sudden just disappeared.
Oh, you're talking about Brendan Fraser.
Yes. Or at least that's what I'd heard. I will admit I didn't go do a ton of digging because I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
But,
no,
but politics in Hollywood are kind of scary, actually. How quickly, like, oh, the you know, what the gal that played Padme in Star Wars, what's her name? Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman. Yeah.
Career almost destroyed by George Lucas because he decided she wasn't a good actress. And I'm like, that woman won a Tony before she ever worked with you.
Well, okay. Well, let's back this up a little bit. I'm not defending George Lucas, nor am I defending anybody with Brendan Fraser.
I'm not defending bad behavior.
I'm not defending bad behavior. And George Lucas, by the way, you have your own problems. You need to keep your mouth shut about stuff. 100%, okay,
100%.
Mr. I like. Well, and Lucas comes out of this particular strain, particularly in film, that is a strain of directors who really, really like the technicalities of directing and the technology of directing.
Yeah.
But they would rather the human beings not show up. And George Lucas, there's a long line of these folks. The most current probable example of that's probably the most high profile, at least at this point in directorial history, used to be Michael Mann. Now I think it's Christopher Nolan. I think Christopher Nolan has taken over Michael Mann's spot only because Michael Mann just doesn't do as much directing as he used to do. He's banging out that Heat sequel allegedly somewhere. Okay, cool. Good on him. But you have this line of directors that care more about the technicality of directing than they do the actual human beings. Then you have directors who care more about the human beings than they do about the technicality of the directing. Such directors would be mid-career Steven Spielberg was like that. I'm talking about the Steven Spielberg that directed 1941 and then wound up washed up on the shores of Saving Private Ryan. That's that. And then post Saving Private Ryan, he's become something else. And I'll leave that aside for just a second. I think those are two good bookends. Or you have the classic sort of director. This is the third kind of director you have in film that cares more about the story than even they do the actors or the technicalities. The biggest example has been Woody Allen during his entire career. He cares about the story. That's it. You could drop any actors, as he has proven in his later career. You could literally drop any actors in that script and it doesn't matter. It's Woody Allen. Wes Anderson is probably the youngest end of that sort of ideal. So you've got story directors, you've got people directors, you've got technical directors. Lucas is definitely a technical director. So if you could have gotten rid of Natalie Portman, period, all of them, and like digitized the whole freaking thing, all of Star Wars, he would have done that. Because he doesn't like any people. They're all a problem. They all talk too much. They all have egos. They all screw up your story. Whatever, Mr. Precious over there. Okay, fine. I think you probably have the same dynamics in the theater. You have people you have directors who really, really care about the story that they are telling, whether that story is Cats, or
what story?
Black Narcissus. Careful. Careful. I wrote a whole review of the Cats movie, which was an abomination one time many years ago when I worked for a film review site under an anonymous nom de plume. Anyway, but all the way from Cats to like Black Orpheus or some German opera I've never heard of, they care about the story all the way to, and then you have actors who are not actors, sorry, you have directors who really care about the technicality of doing theater. Right, how the stage looks, how the lights are set. I would maybe classify conductors in this space, the Leonard Bernstein types or the Tar types. And then you have those, and this is more like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Whiplash with J.K. Simmons about the drummer.
It's on the list.
Oh, you got to watch Whiplash.
It's on the list.
But these are people who care about the level of professionalism that you are giving a performance. And I would put Graff in Ender's Game in that J.K. Simmons sort of spot. I know he was played by Harrison Ford in the movie, but in that spot where he cares about the professionalism of people showing up. to lay this at the feet of a 6-year-old, just to sort of loop back to where,
oh my gosh, yes,
is kind
right?
of a lot. But let's talk a little about this. So kids, right? Scott Card begins with the conceit of kids. Why children? Because initially when I read Ender's Game, and by the way, I had not read Scott Card before. I thought, and my first sort of impression after reading about the first, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 chapters was, this is a combination of Starship Troopers and Lord of the Flies. This is like, what if all those kids on the island before the pilot shows up, after they've killed Piggy, they all get guns and go off to shoot the bugs. Like, this is what you get. Like, these are the two tropes. Talk about tropes. These are the two tropes that you've merged together. You've merged Starship Troopers and Lord of the Flies with a touch of the Matrix in there, just so they can all get some practice. Okay, and learn kung fu. All right, great. That's what we've done here. Or maybe it's that Lord of the Flies existed obviously before Ender's Game, but he's taking William Goldman, and he's sort of updating it for a later post-Vietnam War kind of time. Why kids though? Because there's something really creepy about using kids.
Yes, there is. I think they like what? So wait, hold on. What's the question? Why kids within the frame of the universe, or why does Orson Scott Card choose to use kids?
Both. I mean, why would Orson? Okay, let's go with a much larger question.
Right? Like within the universe, they I know they're kind of the same. So can be the same answer. Yeah. But like. I think they do address it in the book, but they talk about tapping into military genius real early. And I think part of why kids is because, I think the science, the brains are more elastic, right? And they learn faster. They absorb information and are piecing things together just at a phenomenal rate. Partially as a survival thing, like you just have to. And that's just where the phases of their brains are. So I would imagine that there's the most receptivity to information, but also in the brilliant ones, like you see in Ender, and the creative ones, is they're starting to formulate solutions that adults because adults are operating. Hold on, let me finish the sentence. They're starting to formulate solutions that adults just can't see, because adults are operating within frames. And we don't even see the frames anymore. We don't even realize that we're operating within particular frameworks. We just believe that that's reality.
Right.
I think there are certain groups who talk about this enough and have kind of, you said the Matrix, brought enough awareness to this idea like the Matrix. And they're starting to learn how to shift their frames a little bit, or at least see the frames. But the kids they don't have to spend any energy, because they don't have frames yet, really. Their frames are being built. And so if you need a brilliant kid, a genius, to come up with a solution that no adult can come up with, or if you need someone to come up with a solution that nobody can conceive of, well then you get a really, 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 really smart kid. And you train him, you give him just enough information, you put him in just the right circumstances, like Graff does. It's all very strategic. And I love that the little before each chapter, there's the little snippets where you kind of get to see Graff's logic behind everything he does, and just continuously driving Ender towards this end goal. And in that sense, very much shaping Ender in a way, but it's shaping it. It's like a loose shaping, if that makes sense. It's driving him towards the goal, but letting Ender almost shape himself. I don't know if that makes any sense. And yes, it is creepy, and it's very like ethically questionable.
Well,
when it was like in the game, in the book, what's the word I'm looking for? The human race, right? The continuation of the human race is at stake. So it's like,
so everything's on the table.
Everything's on the tables. Well, what won't we do to make sure that the human race continues? And I think the answer in this book is nothing.
Right.
This amount of cruelty that we see with the boys, that's cruelty. Not just the boys, the girls in there too, though they're rare.
Right.
Petra shows up and she's a badass, which I love. Petra. She's so cool.
Well, you got Petra, you got Valentine, who is
Love
counterbalancing the
Valentine.
sociopath
Yeah.
Peter. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
um, which, by the way,
Um,
opens up other not morally questionable, but opens up other ideas around can children be sociopathic? Which is an interesting question. Do children have a responsibility to each other? Not to tell necessarily, but to manage. And then, of course, the other sticky wicket question, which it shows up in chapter, I believe, 10. And I cannot remember the name of the character right now, although it will come to me. But the character that that Ender runs into when he goes onto the Rat Squad, which we're about to read this section a little bit here, but the one
Rose to Nose, the commander.
No, not the one, not the commander, not the guy who was sitting back in the tall grass. The other guy who was like his second in charge or whatever.
One of his lieutenants. Yeah,
one of his lieutenants. Yeah,
he was like running practices. Yeah,
he was running practices and stuff. You're right, and that character reminded me of Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen. The comic book, not the HBO show, not that abomination, and not the movie either, which was great. The movie was great. The HBO show was an abomination. Don't bother with that nonsense. Go read the Alan Moore book.
Just go read the book. Yeah.
Go read the book. But there's this great line that Dr. Manhattan says, and he says, everyone is a puppet. I'm just the one that can see the strings. And the kid,
oh gosh, what a creepy line,
says this, right, basically to Ender, right?
Yes.
They're manipulating us here, and
I'm not going to play their game.
Not going to play the game. Yeah. I'm or Ultron in Avengers. I'm going to cut the strings.
Yeah.
You know, or Pinocchio. I'm going to become a real boy. And yes, I've laid out, or AI, right? The Stanley Kubrick. Yeah. So we're laying it all out here. But again, that's the line of science fiction. And so well, I want to talk about Ender going onto the new squad. I'm going to skip ahead a bunch of chapters. There's a bunch of things that happen. Go read the book. We never cover the whole book. I always say this on the podcast. We never, ever cover the whole book. We just give you enough snippets and ideas and thoughts around it so that you can go and pick it up yourself. And so I would encourage you to pick up Ender's Game, particularly if you're going to be an officer candidate in the United States Marine Corps. Get ahead of your reading. You're
going into any sort of leadership, really.
Really, exactly. Back to the book, back to Ender's Game. So we're going to pick it up when he switches from his initial command, or not his initial command, but his initial assignment after having performed admirably to a new assignment. Back to Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Ender Wiggin, the little fothead who leads the standings. What a pleasure to have you with us. The commander of Rat Army lay sprawled on a lower bunk, wearing only his desk. With you around, how can any army lose? Several of the boys nearby laughed. There could not have been two more opposite armies than Salamander and Rat. The room was rumpled, cluttered, noisy. After Bonzo, Ender had thought that undiscipline would be a welcome relief. Instead, he found that he had come to expect quiet and order, and the disorder here made him uncomfortable. We doing okay, Ender Bender. I rose the nose, Jew boy extraordinaire, and you ain't got nothing but a pinprick of a goy. Don't you forget it. Since the IF was formed, the strategos of the military forces had always been a Jew. There was a myth that Jewish generals didn't lose wars, and so far it was still true. It made any Jew in the battle school dream of being strategos and conferred prestige on him from the start. It also caused resentment. Rat Army was often called the Kike Force, half in praise, half in parody of Maserati's strike force. There were many who liked to remember that during the second invasion, even though an American Jew as president was hegemon of the alliance, an Israeli Jew was strategos and overall command of IF defense, and a Russian Jew was polemarch of the fleet, it was Mazarakim, a little-known, twice court-martialed, half Maori, half New Zealander, whose strike force broke up and finally destroyed the bugger fleet in the action around Saturn. If Mazarakim could save the world, then it didn't matter a bit whether you were a Jew or not, people said. But it did matter, and Rose the Nose knew it. He mocked himself to forestall the mocking comments of anti-Semites. Almost everyone he defeated in battle became, at least for a time, a Jew hater, but he also made sure everyone knew what he was. His army was in second place, bucking for first. I took you on, Goy, because I didn't want people to think I only win because I got great soldiers. I want them to know that even with a little puke of a soldier like you, I can still win. We only got 3 rules here. Do what I tell you, and don't piss in the bed. Ender nodded. He knew that Rose wanted him to ask what the 3rd rule was, so he did. That was 3 rules. We don't do too good in math here. The message was clear. Winning was more important than anything. Your practice sessions with half-assed little launchies are over, Wigan. Done. You're in the big boy's army now. I'm putting you in Dink Meeker's room. From now on, as far as you're concerned, Dink Meeker is God. Then who are you? The personnel officer who hired God. Rose grinned. And you are forbidden to use your desk again until you've frozen 2 enemy soldiers in the same battle. This order is out of self-defense. I hear you're a genius programmer. I don't want you scrolling around my desk. Everybody erupted in laughter. It took Ender a moment to understand why. Rose had programmed his desk to display and animate a bigger-than-life-size picture of male genitals, which waggled back and forth as Rose held the desk on his naked lap. This was just the sort of commando Bonzo would trade me to, thought Ender. How does a boy who spends his time like this win battles? Ender found Dink Meeker in the game room, not playing, just sitting and watching. The guy pointed you out, Ender said. I'm Ender Wigan. I know, said Meeker. I'm in your tune. I know, he said again. I'm pretty inexperienced. Dink looked up at him. Look, Wigan, I know all this. Why do you think I asked Rose to get you for me? He had not been dumped. He had been picked up. He had been asked for. Meeker wanted him. Why? Asked Ender. I've watched your practice sessions with the launchies. I think you show some promise. Bonzo is stupid, and I wanted to get you better training than Petra could give you. All she can do is shoot. I needed to learn that. You still move like you were afraid to wet your pants. So teach me. So learn. I'm not going to quit my free time practice sessions. I don't want you to quit them. Rose the Nose does. Rose the Nose can't stop you. Likewise, he can't stop you from using your desk. So why did he order it? Listen, Ender. Commanders have just as much authority as you let them have. The more you obey them, the more power they have over you. What's to stop them from hurting me? Ender remembered Bonzo's blow. I thought that was why you were taking a personal attack class. You really have been watching me, haven't you? Dink didn't answer. I don't want to get Rose mad at me. I want to be part of the battles now. I'm tired of sitting out till the end. Your standings will go down. This time, Ender didn't answer. Listen, Ender, as long as you're part of my tune, you're part of the battle. Ender soon learned why. Dink trained his tune independently from the rest of Rat Army with discipline and vigor. He never consulted with Rose, and only rarely did the whole army maneuver together. It was as if Rose commanded one army and Dink commanded a much smaller one that happened to practice in the battle room at the same time. Dink started out the first practice by asking Ender to demonstrate his feet-first attack position. The other boys didn't like it. How can we attack lying on our backs, they asked. To Ender's surprise, Dink didn't correct them, didn't say, you aren't attacking on your back, you're dropping downward toward them. He had seen what Ender was doing, but he had not understood the orientation that it implied. It soon became clear to Ender that even though Dink was very, very good, his persistence in holding on to the corridor gravity orientation, instead of thinking of the enemy gate as downward, was limiting his thinking. You can't build a Maserati with Toyota parts. You can try. That's something I wrote in my book, 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. I believe that's in chapter 5, rule number 5, around team building. Rose the Nose, who I do imagine as a kid from Brooklyn, yo, top of the food chain. Little Jewish kid with a chip on his shoulder. Is trying to build a Maserati over there with Toyota parts. Or maybe he's not. Maybe he's happy with the Toyota he's got. But if you're Ender, you're never going to really know. Dink also brought up a good point, and it is valuable. It is something that myself, as a person who has led others and who has been led by others, when I have made the choice to place myself under authority to others, I've always kept this in mind intentionally at the front of my brain. Commanders have just as much authority as you let them have. The more you obey them, the more power they have over you. I'm not going to let you have that much power over me, or I'm going to let you have a lot. By the way, on the other end, you rarely find commanders, you rarely find leaders who understand this concept that they are allowed, they are given permission to have power over people, and that they need to be careful with that. Most of the time, most of the leaders that you run across are just sort of grabbing it and running with it slipshod. Rose the Nose and Dink there in Rat Army are two poles that are opposing Bonzo in Salamander Army. And what you get here in this piece of Ender's Game, when you switch Ender from Salamander to Rat Army, what you get is, well, you get an example of what I would call laissez-faire or que sera, sera approach to leadership. Whatever will be, will be. But that's a strategy. It's a strategy that leads to different tactics that we are going to be using. And I think Rose's, and you see this later on in the book, Rose's tactics of creating an elite squad inside of his elite squad was probably not a bad idea, at least initially. The problem is, though, at a certain point, the laissez-faire to leadership, well, you're going to have to jerk the chain. Because if you let the dog go too far away or operate too far outside of the fence, it can bite all kinds of mailmen on the street, even before they get to your house. But you have to be fair when you do it, right? And so there is something that's exposed here on Rat Army that I want to talk a little bit about. I want to explore a little bit about with Christen. This idea of fairness. I fundamentally believe that for leaders, fairness is a trap. You can't be fair. There's absolutely no way to be fair. There's no way to make things apply to everyone. There is a such thing as a standard, don't get me wrong, and there is an ethic, but there's also reality. And the reality is people come with different stories, people come with different problems, people come with different issues. And I probably would have done better in Rat Army than in Salamander Army. And me and Bonzo or Bozo or whoever, we would have gotten into a fist fight right from the jump. Right from the jump. And you know that's just sort of me putting myself in the story. But taking myself out, I could definitely see how some need Rose the Nose's approach versus old Bonzo's approach there. But neither one of those approaches is fair. So how do leaders avoid the fairness trap?
Oh gosh. It also, I guess it depends on how you're defining fair, because to me, I think if the rules are clear, then kind of I guess that's part of how I define fair, right? So Bonzo's rules were very clear, and there were some behaviors there that felt unjust. But you know, as soon as you start to understand his personality, his behavior, you're like, it all starts to become understandable. Maybe not fair necessarily, but the way he ran his army, that he had very clear rules. No, it wasn't fair that he told Ender, no, you're allowed nothing. You come through the gate 4 minutes after the battle has started, and then you float there and you don't even draw your gun. That's not fair. That feels very unjust. But it also probably didn't feel fair to him that he got saddled with a Launchy way early, an early Launchy, like who
whit, like with any leader, I say boo hoo.
Oh yeah. Oh, Bonzo, sure. I don't think, like, there are a lot of issues with Bonzo's leadership, 100%. But if we're talking just about fairness, like if Bonzo had any sort of leadership salt, 100% would have just picked up Ender and been like, how can I make the best use of you? Right. That would have been the question that he asked, not looking at Ender for what he was, rather than who he was and what he brought to the table. I think that's what good leaders do, is they whoever they have on their team, whoever they hire, whoever is thrust upon them, but okay, what do you bring to the table? How does that serve our end goal? And everything, and I guess there's that, we've been talking about, serving the story or the end goal or the theme or whatever. Like, if we can put egos aside, and I think if leaders can do that first, the whole team starts to fall in line. And I remember we were talking about, leaders only have the power that we give them. And I remember I heard this first from Tony Robbins, and then again from a couple of marketing trainings that I did, how the person who enters the situation with the strongest frame wins. And I think that's what leaders, those are the people who rise up to leaders. They have the strongest frame. This is how things are. And everybody else that ends up following them is like, they kind of give to that frame, and they follow. So how can leaders avoid the trap of fairness? I think
because you're going to get a lot of leaders who are going to listen to this and they're going to go, okay, number one, you're talking about a kid's book, but okay, let's leave that aside for just a minute.
Oh, I had a thought come up about that, actually.
Okay. Number two is science fiction. So, okay. But, we're doing a month of science fiction.
They're still applicable.
It's still applicable, right? So I think we've sold that. We've sold that idea. I think that now we're in a space where a couple of things there. One, if the leader above the leader doesn't have a clear end goal, this is where open-ended commitments can really screw up a leader, right? So if I am Colonel Graff in this example, the war against the bugs or whoever can't be an open-ended, it can't be Vietnam. I can't be Bob McNamara.
Oh gosh.
We're just gonna have an open-ended commitment until someone yells stop. And we're gonna fight a war of attrition until the other guy yells stop. But the other guy is going, we're gonna fight a war of attrition until you yell stop. So no one yells stop. Right? Okay. Open-ended commitments don't work. They frustrate the civilian population. They frustrate the observers of your organization.
I think psychologically we just struggle with it in general, like as humans.
It's a never-ending story because we live in bookends. Like you're born and you die. Like there's bookends, and a bunch of stuff. I mean, somebody made this. I was born. I did a few things. Actually, it was one of the characters in The Sopranos, Paulie Walnuts. Yeah, I was born. I did a few things. I thought some things were going to happen. I thought nothing was going to happen. Nothing did, and now I'm going to die. That's my character arc. Like, because what's his name was worried about character arcs. He was trying to be a writer, right?
Yeah.
Christopher Maltasanti was worried about character arcs. Like, that's my character arc. I was born. And then I died. Look, that's the arc. We like this as human beings because we have character arcs, and our arcs are we're born, we do some stuff. Little arcs happen inside of the larger arc, and then at a certain point, to paraphrase from Fight Club, we're very thematic on this podcast episode today, but to paraphrase from Fight Club, on a long enough timeline, everyone's survival rate drops to 0. Okay. Open-ended commitments frustrate us. And when the open-ended commitment is given to a leader by another leader, there is no end goal. Now you've got to lead these people inside of this open-ended commitment to what end? What are we doing? And by the way, you're going to throw me these people that you're going to tell me that I've got to develop without telling me I've got to develop them. And I'm a kid, so like this is a whole passel of problems. Yeah. they're just sort of opened up. You're expecting me to find brilliance, or even worse, you tell me this kid is brilliant, but I don't see any evidence of brilliance. And we see this dynamic happen among adults all the time.
Yes. And you were talking about how Rosen's style of, if you want to call it leadership, he's in a leadership position. So I think almost we have to call it a style of leadership. And he's winning. That's the other thing. He's winning.
It's that laissez-faire.
Yes, but I think the only reason it works, because you were talking about Dink, right? And how if you let the dog go too far, he's going to start doing things that you don't want him to do, and you will have no power to rein him back in.
Correct.
And I think the only reason it works with that army is because Dink just doesn't care. Dink's, he's like, he's out. He's like, I don't want to play their game. It's not a power struggle for Dink, so he's never going to challenge Rosen because he doesn't care.
It's not a power struggle for Dink, but Dink doesn't mind being used as a weapon,
right?
In a much larger sort of personal battle. And this is something that I think leaders fail to understand. Most of your followers are going to come with ulterior motives, some of which they may not even be aware of themselves. We talked about identity of your stocking shelves at Albertsons, right? Or if you are hitting the right notes in a particular opera, there's going to be identity and ego issues there.
High notes for sopranos.
There you go. There you go. There's going to be ego issues if you are no, not even ego issues. There's going to be issues of utility and open-ended goals, like we're talking about right now. If you're a follower, if you have no clue where you're going and you know the leader has no clue where they're going, why are you following them? Yeah. What, are we on a lark? Are we just walking around? Like, what's happening? Like, what are we doing? Right. By the way, I could walk around by myself. Like, I really don't need to follow you in order to do that. So we've got that. And then, of course, we've got the idea from Graff, also an Ender's Game, and the larger sort of unnamed, we're going to talk about propaganda here in a little bit, the unnamed planetary goal that's too big for kids to know, which we also see this dynamic in bureaucratic systems. The little people can't know about what we're doing. They just need to be cogs in the wheel because we're the delicate geniuses that are going to fix the problem. Except here's the problem. You're more like Bob McNamara than you are like Albert Einstein. You're not a delicate genius. You're just as stupid as anybody else. And we talk a lot about the Constitution on our podcast during the month of July because it's worthwhile to talk about. Because in our system of government in the United States of America, for those of you listening internationally, we've built in a tripartite system where every piece of the system checks another piece of the system because every piece of the system recognizes that other piece over there might not be too bright. And we sort of have placed this in our founding documents, which creates frustration for people from the outside looking at us because, oh my God, you guys can't get anything done. But it prevents the leader with the strongest frame of reference from just establishing a tyranny.
Yes.
But Graff is theoretically right. And by the way, even in practice, that's actually worked out pretty well. We've had a pretty stable system for 200, almost 230 years. Like, let's not knock the system. It's worked out pretty well. Even in this quote unquote, and I don't believe we're in late stage. The United States is in a sort of late stage thing. I think we're actually in not even middle age. I think we're coming out of adolescence and coming into adulthood.
Yes, I think that's probably more accurate. Yeah.
This is the adolescence moving into maturity, sort of.
Yeah, we're in puberty. It's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable and awkward, and our voice is cracking, and we embarrass ourselves in front of everybody else. And
weird smells are coming out of us. We have no clue. Yes. We have strange desires. We're pointed in all kinds of different directions.
There you go. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Things are growing out of different spots, like
but hair. We do think places. The world is ending.
That's right. So we're in this weird adolescent period in the United States of America, and we'll come out of it on the other side. It'll be fine, just like every other adolescent does. But it's going to be a little bit choppy between like 13 and 18. It's going to be choppy. Always into the nation state level. But you've got Graff operating at that bureaucratic nation state level with all the dynamics that are there. I didn't get the sense that, not even the sense. There's no sense in Ender's Game that any of that communication is going downward, even to the commander level. So how can the commander serve an end goal if it's open-ended?
Oh, that's interesting. I think the reason it works, at least within the framework of the story, is because even though they don't know exactly what the end goal, all of those boys know that they're there to practice fighting a war. Now, I understand that that's still open-ended, but the goal is probably not specific enough for them. But I don't know that they need it to become, because they actually explicitly say this: Ender can't know what's happening because Ender's too empathetic. He has just the perfect balance of Peter and Valentine, and he's so afraid of being Peter that if they had wanted a kid that knew exactly what was happening and would go do it anyway, they would just have picked Peter. You want a kid who's willing to commit genocide, or spoilers.
Like
it's 20-year-old book or however long.
It's a 30-year-old book. It's fine.
Yeah, there you go. But if you want a kid who's willing to commit genocide to preserve the human race, like, just pick Peter. He'll do it.
Oh, he'll accommodate you.
Yeah. And so that's why that first excerpt was so important. They needed to know why. So Ender was that middle ground that we can't seem to really find as humanity. But Ender can't know. They need his mind to think like, oh, this is just a game, and I'm optimizing without consequences, which is what frees up creativity, and it's sometimes in a bad way in video games like that we see in our society today, but can lead to like absolutely ridiculously awesome things as well. Would that the creativity was applied to real world problems.
Well, the real world pushes back on you. That's the problem. The real world pushes back on you, right? That whole equal and opposite reaction thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You want to optimize without consequences? That's cute.
Right.
That's cute. You go right ahead. You optimize.
Yeah. But there's always consequences. Yeah.
Right. Well, we talked about this on the podcast before in the context of other books, right? Particularly Nietzsche, right? So when Nietzsche lays out his theory of nihilism, which in essence he calls his theory of reality. He's just for him, he's just a prophet of reality. Okay. Okay. Reality as you see it, sir. That's fine. Yes. When he lays out his theory of reality, he doesn't count on, nor does he factor into his equation. You see this with a lot of philosophers and a lot of philosophies, whether they are of economics, of society, or of culture. And this is where totalitarian tyrannies fail. They do not take into account other people. They fail miserably at that. So I'll use an example here. If I am a person who wants to let's say I'm part of a group of 1,000 people in the world that's very wealthy, and I want to establish a new system of economic development for all of the people on the planet, because I have money, I graduated from the right schools, and I float around in the right circles with the right people. And so I think that I have a right to have my thoughts on economic policy become the thing that everybody else follows, because if you were so smart, you would be rich along with me. Okay. All that's ego, all wrapped up into knowledge and identity and all that. But okay. And by the way, I can't acknowledge that I have an ego publicly, because then the whole house of cards would collapse. Okay. I'm part of 1,000. I'm part of 1,000 people that are establishing this, right? I'm having dinners and I'm going to school and I'm hanging out with people that all think like me. I never run into someone who's like, I don't know, just trying to cross 110th Street in New York City. Just trying to stay. I never run into those people. Or if I do, they're caricatures, or I see them on TV or something. I don't know any. Right. I don't know anybody in my circle that's real like that, right? And so I create technologies, or I create ideas, or I create economic systems, or I create books, or I create theories, and they go out and they promulgate. And by virtue of me being part of this delicate group of 1,000 geniuses with a bunch of money, I get to shape how everything works. Except the problem is that guy crossing 110th Street, he's going to have an opinion. And he might just say no. And we saw this, by the way, most recently in our world in stark reality, regardless of what you may think of my theory. We saw this in stark reality with the name, with the virus of unknown origin that came from somewhere that we had in 2020, 2021, and 2022, right? So we saw this pop up, right? We saw people who were part of that delicate genius group of 1,000 people telling us what we were going to do. And then a bunch of other people said, well, that's cool that you have an opinion, as Andrew Jackson said once infamously about the Supreme Court. John Marshall has made his decision. Now let's see you come down here and enforce it. Now, in certain countries, they did go down and enforce it. In a country that shall remain nameless, they were welding people into their houses. Okay. Welding doors shut. Okay. You can see all this on Twitter, by the way. The internet never forgets. And so if you're part of that group of 1,000 delicate geniuses, taking in consideration other people is probably a good idea. But this is the challenge with all systems. And so leaders have to take into consideration, I'm saying all this to say this, leaders have to take into consideration other people, that other people might have a thought. They might have an engagement.
Well, just understand, if you're going to try to implement a system like that, then like you have to be ready for pushback. It's like what you said.
Yeah.
But like, not everybody's going to see the world the same way you do. Not everybody like, in fact, that's guaranteed.
Well, and isn't that the point of democracy? Like, you're supposed to have a system, the demos, right?
Yeah,
where the individual pushes back, right? Individual has the opportunity to push back. We no longer live under the divine right of kings. Okay, speaking of that larger system, I do want to get to Peter and Valentine a little bit, because, you know, we've looked at Ender, we've looked at Graff a little bit, we've looked at Ender with the Rat Squad versus the Salamander Squad, and then there's another layer to this cake. Yeah. And it is a layer that is driven by, well, it's
very interesting.
It was sort of, and I will preface this excerpt that I'm about to read by saying this. I was kind of surprised it took Scott Card this long to drop it in the book. Because I was like, why didn't you front load this? But maybe that's just a matter of preference.
Yeah.
Versus sort of where it fits in the overall, you know, sort of plot arc that he's trying to build out. But I would have dropped it in first, because this is the part that's fascinating to me, but that's just my temperament. And so I get that, and I accept that. I'm not holding it against him. I'm really saying this to me is probably just as important as the games that are happening with Ender.
Oh yes,
if not more so, because this will determine where the games go. But
and it also sets up his like the future books. Really quick, not to interrupt, that was a wonderful segue, just to make sure we answered the question about falling into the trap of fairness.
Yes. Yeah. Like, this is what we do here. We wander. We
meander. But I was thinking about it, and I think leaders, like, can't be overly concerned. We keep talking about trying to get to the middle, right? About being fair. We understand that people that follow us are going to be very concerned about being treated fairly. And so in that regard, I think it has to be in the leader's mind, but you can't be overly concerned. There are going to be decisions that you make that people are going to be like, that's not fair. Be like, sorry. Well, or not sorry.
Well, the example that I use is, if you have surgery, actually, this is a variation of the example that I use. If you're having surgery, I don't think, not even surgery, if you have a gunshot wound, right, and you go to the emergency room, you don't really want the nurses talking about what's fair with the doctor while you're bleeding out.
No. Just get the damn job done, please.
You want someone to stop the bleeding.
It's my life.
I would, if I had the capacity to do it, I would do it, but I don't. That's why I'm coming to you. Or if my house is burning down, I don't really want the firefighters to have an empathetic moment with each other, hugging. My house is on fire. Put the fire out.
Right.
Or like, if I'm calling the cops, I need the cops to show up before my stuff gets stolen, or while it's in the process of getting stolen. Right. And I need the police to stop the person stealing. I don't need the police worried about political correctness, or, quite frankly, what the gender or race is of the person doing the illegal act. I need you to stop that act from happening, because if I could do it, I would do it myself. I would have, but I outsource all of that. This is the social agreement that we've all made. I pay taxes, and I outsource the options. Steven Pinker talks about this in Better Angels of Our Nature. I outsource all of the options for personal violence for dealing with that. I've outsourced all of that to the state. And we've long ago made this deal in the West.
Yeah.
And my expectation is that deal will be followed. The second that deal falls apart, now we're into something else.
Yeah.
We're into something else.
Yep.
And the deal can fall apart if there's bad reporting on what the actual deal is. Back to the book, back to Ender's Game. Valentine celebrated Ender's 8th birthday alone in the wooded backyard of their new home in Greensboro. She scraped a patch of ground bare of pine needles and leaves, and there scratched his name in the dirt with a twig. Then she made a small teepee of twigs and needles and lit a small fire. It made smoke that interwove with the branches and needles of the pine overhead. All the way into space, she said silently, all the way to battle school. No letters had ever come, and as far as they knew, their own letters had never reached him. When he was first taken, father and mother sat at the table and keyed in long letters to him every few days. Soon, though, it was once a week, and when no answers came, once a month. Now it had been 2 years since he went, and there were no letters, none at all, and no remembrance on his birthday. He is dead, she thought bitterly, because we have forgotten him. But Valentine had not forgotten him. She did not let her parents know, and above all, never hinted to Peter how often she thought about Ender, how often she wrote him letters that she knew he would not answer. And when mother and father had announced to them that they were leaving the city to move to North Carolina, of all places, Valentine knew they never expected to see Ender again. They were leaving the only place where he knew to find them. How would Ender find them here among these trees under this changeable and heavy sky? He had lived deep in corridors all his life, and if he was still in battle school, there was less of nature there. What would he make of this? Valentine knew why they had moved here. It was for Peter. Living among trees and small animals, so that nature, in as raw a form as mother and father could conceive it, might have a softening influence on their strange and frightening son. And in a way, it had. Peter took to it right away. Long walks out in the open, cutting through woods and out into the open country, going sometimes for a whole day with only a sandwich or two, sharing space with his desk and the pack on his back, with only a small pocket knife in his pocket. But Valentine knew. She had seen a squirrel half-skinned, spiked by its little hands and feet with twigs pushed into the dirt. She pictured Peter trapping it, staking it, then carefully parting and peeling back the skin without breaking into the abdomen, watching the muscles twist and ripple. How long had it taken the squirrel to die? And all the while, Peter had sat nearby, leaning against the tree where perhaps the squirrel had nested, playing with his desk while the squirrel's life seeped away. At first, she was horrified and nearly threw up at dinner, watching how Peter ate so vigorously, talked so cheerfully. But later she thought about it and realized that perhaps for Peter, it was a kind of magic, like her little fires, a sacrifice that somehow stilled the dark gods that hunted his soul. Better to torture squirrels than other children. Peter has always been a husbandman of pain, planting it, nurturing it, devouring it greedily when it was ripe. Better he should take it in these small, sharp doses than with dull cruelty to children in the school. A model student, said his teachers. I just wish we had 100 others in the school just like him. Studies all the time, turns in all his work on time. He loves to learn. But Valentine knew it was a fraud. Peter loved to learn all right, but the teachers hadn't taught him anything ever. He did his learning through his desk at home, tapping into libraries and databases, studying and thinking, and above all, talking to Valentine. Yet at school, he acted as though he were excited about the puerile lesson of the day. Oh, wow, I never knew that frogs look like this inside, he'd say. And then at home, he'd study the bindings of cells into organisms through phylotic collation of DNA. Peter was a master of flattery, and all his teachers bought it. Still, it was good. Peter never fought anymore, never bullied, got along well with everybody. It was a new Peter. Everyone believed it. Father and mother said it so often it made Valentine want to scream at them. It isn't the new Peter. It's the old Peter, only smarter. How smart? Smarter than you, father. Smarter than you, mother. Smarter than anybody you have ever met. But not smarter than me. I've been deciding, said Peter, whether to kill you or what. Valentine leaned against the trunk of the pine tree, her little fire a few smoldering ashes. I love you too, Peter. It would be so easy. You always make these stupid little fires. It's just a matter of knocking you out and burning you up. You're such a firebug. I've been thinking of castrating you in your sleep. No, you haven't. You only think of things like that when I'm with you. I bring out the best in you. No, Valentine, I've decided not to kill you. I've decided that you're going to help me. I am. A few years ago, Valentine would have been terrified at Peter's threats. Now, though, she was not so afraid. Not that she doubted he was capable of killing her. She couldn't think of anything so terrible that she didn't believe Peter might do it. She also knew, though, that Peter was not insane, not in the sense that he wasn't in control of himself. He was in better control of himself than anyone she knew, except perhaps herself. Peter could delay any desire as long as he needed to. He could conceal any emotion. And so Valentine knew that he would never hurt her in a fit of rage. He would only do it if the advantages outweighed the risks, and they did not. In a way, she actually preferred Peter to other people because of this. He always acted out of intelligent self-interest. And so, to keep herself safe, all she had to do was make sure it was more in Peter's interest to keep her alive than to have her dead. Valentine, things are coming to a head. I've been tracking troop movements in Russia. What are you talking about? The world, Val. You know Russia, big empire, the Second Warsaw Pact, rulers of Eurasia and the Netherlands to Pakistan. They don't publish their troop movements, Peter. Of course not, but they do publish their passenger and freight train schedules. I've had it on my desk, analyzing those schedules and figuring out where the secret troop trains are moving over the same tracks, done it backward over the past 3 years. In the last 6 months, they've stepped up. They're getting ready for a war, land war. But what about the League? What about the buggers? Valentine didn't know what Peter was getting at, but he often launched discussions like this, practical discussions of world events. He used to test his ideas to refine them. In the process, she also refined her own thinking. She found out while she rarely agreed with Peter about what the world ought to be, they rarely disagreed about what the world actually was. They had become quite deft at sifting accurate information out of the stories of the hopelessly ignorant, gullible news writers, the news herd, as Peter called them. Hallmark is in Russia, isn't he? And he knows what's happening with the fleet. Either they found out the buggers aren't a threat at all, or we're about to have a big battle. One way or another, the bugger war is about to be over. They're getting ready for another war. No, sorry. They're getting ready for after the war. If they're moving troops, it must be under the direction of the strategos. It's all internal, within the Warsaw Pact. This was troubling. The facade of peace and cooperation had been disturbed, that had been undisturbed almost since the bugger wars began. What Peter had detected was a fundamental shift in the world order. She had a mental picture, clear as memory, of the world, of the way the world had been before the buggers forced peace upon them. So it's back to the way it was before. A few changes. The shields make it so nobody bothers with nuclear weapons anymore. We have to kill each other thousands at a time instead of millions. Peter grinned. Val, was bound to happen. Right now, there's a vast international fleet and army in existence with North American hegemony. When the bugger wars are over, all that power will vanish because it's all built on the fear of the buggers. And suddenly we'll look around and discover that all the old alliances are gone, dead and gone, except one, the Warsaw Pact. And it'll be the dollar against 5 million lasers. We'll have the asteroid belt, but they'll have Earth. And you run out of raisins and celery kind of fast out there without Earth. What disturbed Valentine most of all was that Peter did not seem at all worried. Peter, why do I get the idea that you were thinking of this as a golden opportunity for Peter Wiggin? For both of us, Val. Peter, you're 12 years old. I'm 10. They have a word for people our age. They call us children, and they treat us like mice. But we don't think like other children, do we, Val? We don't talk like other children. And above all, we don't write like other children. That was a long jog. And if you read the rest of the chapter, you will see that Valentine and Peter adopt two opposing positions, Locke and Demosthenes. And they begin to push propaganda to the quote-unquote gullible news writers in order to, well, in order to accomplish an end goal. Mm-hmm. And to Christen's point, if you wanted a sociopath just to kill everybody, Peter's your guy. But if you want somebody to manipulate a sociopath, Valentine's your girl. Yep. He's going to do it. Now, this gets into a sticky area which we have to talk about. And it is about the ethics of moral leadership. And the ethics of moral leadership requires understanding how propaganda moves followers. But propaganda by who? So there is the dark triad, corporate psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and that began to be defined in the 1950s, right around the time Orson Scott Card was born. And that has now become codified through our varying adventures in social media. Now, maybe you're born a psychopath, or maybe it's Maybelline, but the nature versus nurture debate is one that will never, I think, fully be resolved, because the answer is, even with the Gattaca-like level of genetic manipulation going on in Ender's Game with the children, life and leadership outcomes are too much based on both elements rather than one or the other. Is Peter a sociopath? Yes. Yes, he is. Was Peter born like that? Probably. Was the ways in which Peter was raised probably ways that allowed more of that to take root? Yes, absolutely. Whose fault is it, though? Who gets the blame? Whose responsibility is it? Who has the weight? Who carries the weight of this dark triad and allowing it into the world? Now, of course, if you're a classic person like I am, classical religious person, you say, well, every man must pay for his own sins. But you also understand that people reach the age of majority, or the age of being able to understand the nature of what sin is, at differing stages of their lives. There's no one hard press spot. It's not like Catholics believe, not at age 7 that you somehow come into a knowledge of what exactly sin is. It's a gradual growing process, a process that should probably be ameliorated by a mother and a father. So the question becomes, when we're looking at this, our last spot in Ender's Game, and by the way, I would recommend going and picking up the book. This ending is a little bit surprising. How can we spot the dark triad, this dark triad of characteristics in leaders before they become a real problem, Christen? I'm going to ask, it's a psychological question.
That's a crazy question, right?
Crazy psychological
question. This is
the
one I went and did research. I was like, okay, I just got to make sure that we have this all right. But first I want to point out that, like, later it's revealed that they left Peter on Earth on purpose to do this, to unify the world. And it works. And he does it. Like, he achieves world peace, and it's insane. If you want to see that, go read the Bean Saga. It's just like, it starts with Ender's Shadow. It's amazing. It's just it's so fascinating. And so, but that, you think about that, like, Peter is a psychopath, and he's cruel, and he has all of these issues, but he achieves world peace in not a completely unethical way, and manages to retain a lot of respect and no, I'm not going to use the word honor. I'll stick with respect. Like, people respect him and do what he says, which, if you are an unreasonably cruel tyrant, people don't do that. Eventually people overthrow you, right? We see that example over and over in history, I think. But okay, so that aside, usually our examples of the dark triad, we point at, like, the evil CEO who's manipulating people and squandering and mistreating their workers, and we want to put, like, twirly mustaches on them. But okay, so I think ultimately the answer to this question is, usually we know when there are problems with leaders. Somebody sees it. Valentine saw it from the get-go. Somebody sees it. The question probably should, like, there should be a follow-up question. People see this. How do we encourage people, or maybe set up systems or structures in which people are safe to say, hey, this guy is scary. Maybe don't put him in a leadership position, because unfortunately, the person who's currently in the leader position probably likes that guy because he's like, hey, he's a lot like me. And so they're not going to set up systems that are going to put more accountability on them, usually, unless they've got some sort of moral compass guiding them. That, you know, where they're like, oh, this is the right thing to do. And very few people are willing to give up more power to do the right thing to do, as we've seen. And so, yeah, it's less of like, how do we spot this, and more of how do we develop maybe a system, if you want to use the word, or maybe even if you just want to contemplate it from an individual perspective, how do we develop the chutzpah to say anything about it? Because these people are truly frightening, and they're manipulative, and often they are already in positions of power where they can hurt you one way or another. And so you just don't want to say anything. And so nobody does. And so they just keep climbing.
So to bring science fiction into this a little bit, this is the whole, do you go back in time and kill Hitler thing? Do you strangle Hitler in his crib? In like 1899 or 1901 or 18 whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right. Or
it
again,
depends on what kind of time you're like, what's your model of time are you dealing with? No, sorry.
Well, we're gonna not deal with. We're not gonna go into quantum physics on this one. We're not gonna go there. Sorry, we're gonna go.
We don't have enough time.
We don't have enough time. We're gonna go straight line Back to the Future. That's what we're doing. Like, that's it. Okay. We have a DeLorean. We have a flux capacitor.
Okay.
We have 1.21 gigawatts. That's what we're doing. All right. Keep it simple. Simple. That was Zemeckis' brilliance. Bob Gale. Simple. So I'm not. The most recent research indicates that I was able to find. The most recent research, or not that I was able to find, but that I'm aware of. The most recent research indicates that most people who are in that sort of dark triad space, it's still only around 1 to 2% of the population. It's still a very low number of people. But what has happened is social media usage has allowed those individuals to to expand and scale up their ability to manipulate and to
influence people.
People, right? Okay. And the biggest area where you see problems with this is online, right?
Internet trolls,
right? And the thing that tends to destroy at least the narcissistic parts of the dark triad, and there's some clear research on this, is removing anonymity from these people. However, no one, because of censorship, no one wants to talk about removing anonymity. And what we have found is that when you remove anonymity, it isn't as if that 1% becomes less scale, their behavior becomes less scalable. It still scales, but now they're creating personas and they're doing a bunch of other different things because they're fundamentally manipulative. Okay. And by the way, this is just in the West. This is just with the 4 billion people who are on the internet right now. We don't even have everybody on the planet Earth on the internet right now. There's still over half of us on this planet that get along without the internet just fine. Just fine. Then wars still get fought, people still get fed, babies still get made, all the important stuff still happens. Okay. The challenge of spotting those people, but then the challenge of telling on them is twofold, right? Yes, the first one is being given the skill sets to be able to find them. But the second one is, how do we get people to believe that these people are bad? Any woman who's ever been the victim of harassment, not even online, not even gaslighting, harassment, like these terms that have become de rigueur in our society, right? Yeah. Almost to the point of being overused, I would assert.
Yeah.
They've almost become marketing terms, right?
Yeah.
Just because I disagree with you and tell you I disagree with you doesn't mean I'm gaslighting you. It just means I disagree with you.
Yes.
Okay. So let's be very real about what's happening here. You see this in diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations where, or debates, online and in person, where, if you don't agree with me, then somehow you're not confirming my identity, which is again what Orson Scott Card sort of stumbled into, the author, in some of his thoughts. You also get this with cancel culture, where people on the political left will say, well, cancel culture doesn't really exist because it's just consequences. Okay. Oh yeah. And then you'll have people on the right who will say, well, I mean, do we have is taking away a person's livelihood, is that like, that's the appropriate consequence? Like, really? Like, what are we doing here? And so you have those two sort of things happening, but it's all around the same. Oh yeah, it's all around the same sort of milieu, and it is this idea of, how do we get people to believe what we are seeing with our own lion eyes? And Peter is the classic person who is a problem. And yet
achieves
world peace. Right. Fire can burn your food, but it can also burn your house down. So,
and it can also keep you warm at night. And
right.
It can cook your food, and it can clean your water.
Right. Okay. How do we... There's a sticky wicket of a question as we close, as we How do leaders treat people who are like fire?
Ooh. I think this is going to sound, I feel like this might sound like a, actually, I'm not sure how to describe how this answer is going to sound. The first thought that I had was honesty. Like, have a leader, if you see that behavior, call it out. Not necessarily in public. That can backfire, I think. But with people like that, I'm trying to think, and really, I'm just, the example that I'm using is Peter. I think Peter would have appreciated that. People who see him, you see what he's doing, be like, I see that. I think you're still useful. I know you have value to bring to this table, but I also know that you're dangerous. And so if you step out of line, I'm going to do something about it. With somebody like Peter, you don't necessarily want to tell him what you're going to do, because then he will formulate a contingency plan, and then just completely circumvent that. But I think, like, yeah, just being like, I see you. I understand that you're a lion, but also I understand that, lions can do X, Y, and Z, or whatever we want to, whatever analogy you want to make use of. That would be my guess. But this is as somebody who has never been in like I've never run a corporation. I've never even worked in HR necessarily. I have been in the collaborative environment of a theater, and I have seen, things get spiky. And but I think, just and I think that's also part of just the other reason I hesitated to say that is because it can, there's a very specific group of people that are like, I just want to be seen. Be like, okay, no, you don't actually. You want to be seen, and then you want to be able to dictate how I treat you or how I feel about what I see. I see you, and then this is what I think about it. That's not what you want.
Right. Yeah.
So and I think people like Peter don't care. They just want to be seen.
Well, I think it also takes a certain species of and I think we have a lot of cowards in our world today. A lot of people who are
anonymity and get I feel like
it encourages that. Yeah.
Encourages, that's the word.
I also think that we read Milan Kundera, the Czech author who recently died as of this recording about a couple of months ago. He wrote a book called several books about communism, but not scaled up at like an Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Vaclav Havel sort of level, but more like down into like showing how communism seeped into individual interpersonal interactions. And his most famous book that we covered on this podcast, you can go back and listen to that episode, was The Unbearable Lightness of Being. And what that book really brings home is, as I opened up with that episode, the acidity of moral weakness. And that is what I think, that is where I think we are at right now as a culture.
We can't even decide on what morals are.
Right. We can't have that conversation.
You can't even. There's no absolute moral structure anymore. That if you move out far enough, that's what people say. We're like, well, your morals aren't necessarily my morals. It's like, well, and yet we've all decided that you shouldn't kill someone. Right.
Because then the if it is indeed relative, then there's absolutely an argument to be made for a Machiavellian, psychopathic, narcissistic individual to just have his or her way. Just let them have their way, because it's all relative. But we get real uncomfortable with that idea because we know that means the collapse of not just the collapse of civilizational discourse, but that's just that now it's man against man, and God help us all, whether you believe in that God or not.
Right.
So the challenge of our time, I believe, is inserting or giving people permission to be brave in confronting those kinds of behaviors that they see. We are at the end of Ender's Game. Once again, go pick that up. The Tor edition. Yes, it is a major motion picture. I didn't talk about that.
Don't watch the movie.
I didn't bring it up. I mean, if you're a person who would rather watch the movie than read the book, I would encourage you to read the book.
It's a simple read. It is. It's written very simply. Nice. It's nice.
That's right. And so, Christen, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me.
Wide-ranging conversation.
Yes.
Awesome. And for our listeners, as we sort of round the horn on this, how can leaders stay on the path of leadership by using insights from Ender's Game? How do we stay on the path with this information? What do we do with this stuff?
Oh, right. I think staying on the path of leadership using Ender's Game, or insights from Ender's Game, it's like, don't look down on the people you're managing or leading. It's actually, I think, your job to grow them and find their, like, what do they bring to the table? Grow that. Especially, for, and not, it's not your job to make them like successful and make sure that they have a happy life. That's not your job. You're like, as a leader, especially with a specific objective, right? Whatever talent they're bringing to the table that helps you get to your end goal, grow that and understand that they are complete human beings that have lives. But don't look down on them, and I love this. I've always loved this leadership principle that you have something to learn from everybody. Everybody, something. I think this probably is universal truth. I will die on this.
You'll die on this hill.
But other leadership things from Ender's Game. Be careful about your Peters, but also remember, they can be useful too. And you just you have to know how to deal with them. And I think you have to deal with them in a very particular way. But they can, help bring about world peace, apparently. so don't, that goes back to, the first one. Don't look down. Don't look down on your people.
Yeah.
Just because you're the leadership position. And then I've always, I don't know if this comes up in Ender's Game necessarily, but leadership is service. And Ender definitely moves into that space once we get to the denouement and he's leading people in a social environment rather than in a military environment, is he becomes a servant.
Yeah.
And like the kid is made an admiral by the end, and then he has nothing to do, so he's like, I'm gonna go patch up a ship, or I'm gonna go clean it. Like he starts doing janitor stuff just to have something to do. It's like, and so somebody tells him like, that's above your station. He's like, what? That doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So just like, yes, yeah, you have your security and who you are and what value you bring to the table, especially as a leader. And then but also make sure you're valuing your players and what they bring to the table.
Awesome. I would add to that maybe this. Leadership is not a candy-coated process all of the time, right? Doesn't taste good all the time. There's going to be difficult people on your team. There's going to be difficult situations, but then there's going to be things that go even beyond that, beyond just difficult. It would be nice to have a team full of Valentines, right? Amazing things could get done. It would even be nice to have a team with a mix of Valentines and Enders, right? Yeah, lovely. But more likely than not, you are going to have a team that's going to have not just Valentine and Ender, but you're going to have Colonel Graff. You're going to have Father and Mother. You're going to have Peter. You're going to have Rose the Nose. You're going to have Dink. You're going to have Bonzo. You're going to have Salamander, and you're going to have Rat Squad. You're going to have all of it. You're going to have the entire thing show up on your team. And the leaders that understand that what shows up on their team is what they have to work with. I'm not saying you can turn a Maserati into a Toyota or a Toyota into a Maserati, but what I am saying is that if you don't pull from the clay that you have, the thing that you want to get to, or the goal or the outcome that you want to get to, the beautiful piece of art you want to make, if you can't pull that from the clay you've got, maybe you're not the person to lead. Maybe you're not the person to do the work. Maybe you're not the person to stay on the path. Maybe you're the person to support the person who's going on the path. Maybe you're even the person who widens the path a little bit, but you're not the person who stays on the leadership path. And that's okay. We don't often talk, and we didn't really too much in this podcast. Maybe we will in future episodes next year. We need to talk more about being a good follower. What does it actually mean to follow somebody into the mouth of madness? We recently on the podcast read Moby Dick, and what's it like to follow Captain Ahab? What's it like to follow Ender Wiggins? We need to have more conversations about being a follower on the leadership path, because not everybody's wired to do that clay molding. Not everybody's wired to deal with the personalities and the problems and the issues and the challenges, and yes, also the triumphs and the glories. Knowing what you're capable of and knowing what you're not capable of is one of the biggest ways you could take action as a leader. And Ender's Game can help you figure out some things that will help you get there. Once again, I would like to thank our guest today, Christine Horne. I'm sorry, not Christine, Christen Horne.
Yes.
Why am I saying Christine? Why am I saying Christine?
Everybody does. It's okay.
Everybody does. Oh, it's terrible. Christen Horne.
It's the CH.
It is a CH. Yeah, it throws people off. It's terrible. I should have mastered it by this point in our episode. What would you like to promote today, if anything? What can we link people to? Where can they find you? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, you can find me. I'm actually, as much as I'm on social media, but I'm not on it, if that makes any sense. Like I don't like follow fastidiously the news. But I right now, my current project is I'm working on my own novels. So you can find me at World of Urda, URDA. That's the fantasy world that I'm writing it in. And I'm on basically all of the platforms. If you want to find me to like chat probably the best platform would be something like Instagram, where we can actually chat, Instagram or Facebook. I love discussing stuff like this, like with Hasan. So if you're into this sort of discussion, yeah, you can come find me there. And then also, I am writing my own novels. I do my best to be a very thoughtful writer. And so if you're interested, if you like fantasy, and you like a good love story, and I mean a good love story with fun monster fighting and good, like some psychological drama and exploring all of that, then come hang out with us. We're actually posting our chapters right now. So you can just go read them on our website. And that's also World of Orda, URDA.com. Yeah.
We will have links to World of Orda. We will have links to you finding Christen on Instagram and on Facebook and all those places where you could chat with her. I would encourage you to check out the chapters of her book and see what she's working on as she tries to inspire people to stay on a particular path. Mm-hmm. So once again, I would like to thank Christen Horne for joining us here on the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And with that, well, we're out. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. If you're listening to this on any of the major podcast players like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review and write a little bit in there. A couple of sentences is good enough. That actually helps us game those algorithms that I was just maybe addressing. And, of course, it helps us grow the show. Tell all your family, tell all your friends, and tell the leaders in your life that you know that need to be listening to this show that this show exists. By the way, if you want to get started on the leadership path yourself, or you know some people who need to go on the leadership path, HSCT Publishing, the home company of Leadership Toolbox and Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, can help you and your team do that. So check out our training webinars, coaching services, and more at leadershiptoolbox.us. We are remote, we're live, we're in person, we're on video, and we've got leadership development solutions for your civic group, nonprofit staff, public sector staff, or even your private sector leaders. And of course, you're going to want to check out our video-based subscription service at leadingkeys.com. That's leadingkeys.com for leadership development on demand. You don't like videos, you don't like training, but you really like the podcast? Well, I would also recommend reading a book. Matter of fact, I'd recommend reading my most recent book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. You can get that in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Ingram Spark, and any other place that you order books online. Finally, of course, we're on YouTube just like everybody else is. We'd love to have you help us grow the YouTube channel, so like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the HSCT Publishing channel on YouTube. Just search for HSCT Publishing, or you can search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button. Subscribing helps us grow the show, as it does with the audio, just is the same with the video. All right, that's it for me.